Now, some criticism is unjustified and sinful, and people will oppose you for no good reason. And therefore, here we're told, for example, in Matthew chapter 10, verse 26, "Fear them not, therefore, for there is nothing covered that shall not be revealed, and hid that shall not be known." And he's telling them here, eventually everything's going to be out in the open. And that's a message to, obviously, those who are opposed to God's true servants. It's telling them one day all that you are saying privately to slander God's people will be out in public and exposed and known. But it's also a message to the sufferers themselves that though you be covered with insults, that one day your integrity shall be revealed and known to all. And really God's saying, I know you think nobody sees you, nobody knows how much you're suffering in your ministry or whatever, but I do know, and I will make it known as well. The Lord will judge those who oppose you. Secondly, they can kill your body, but not your soul. Therefore, save your fear for God, who holds your entire life, body and soul in his hands. Now, many protect their bodies, their reputations, at the expense of their souls. And he's saying, look, if you care so much for your body, if you care so much for your reputation, then you should care even more for your soul, which is even more precious. So he says here, verse 28, "Fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul, but rather fear him which is able to destroy both body and soul in hell." He's saying the remedy for a sinful fear is a holy fear. And then thirdly, he says, you're worth more than a sparrow. We see that in verse 29. In fact, two things are brought before us here, two small things to argue God's care for greater things. He's saying, look, a sparrow's almost worthless, and look at the care God has for it. You're worth more than many sparrows. The very hairs of your head are numbered. God's concerned with the most minute detail. So, if God knows when a sparrow falls to the ground, when your hairs fall out, he'll know when your reputation is being dragged down as well. And your ministry with it, maybe. It's interesting when Richard Dawkins is speaking about God. He often uses this example of the sparrow and the hare. And what he says about this is that it shows God all as parochial, as trivial, as it's unbecoming of God to have such a care for hairs and feathers. And yet, for the believer, it's far from making God small. It's like it makes him, all the bigger and huger in our minds and in our hearts. And that nothing is too little for this great God to rule and overrule. And then fourthly, the Lord notes and rewards every word you speak for him or your testimony. So he says, don't fear because the Lord will judge those who oppose you. Don't fear because they can kill your body but not your soul. Don't fear because you're worth more than a sparrow. Don't fear because the Lord notes and rewards your testimony. And so he says in verse 32, "Whosoever therefore shall confess me before men, him will I confess also before my Father which is in heaven. But whosoever shall deny me before men, him will I also deny before my Father which is in heaven." So God is seeing, God is hearing, God is noting your testimony, especially in the face of fearful people and circumstances, and he will reward it. Let's pray. We confess, Lord, that fear is a frequent emotion for us. Help us to hear your quadruple fear not, fear not, fear not, fear not, and all the reasoning for not fearing. so that we can bear criticism, however unjustified it may be. Be with all your servants who are going through this in these days, who are being slandered and persecuted and misrepresented in public and in private, and help them to lay hold on these precious promises. And so, fear not. In Jesus' name, amen. We're in lecture 11, which is the respected chairman, a man with a gavel or a gavel. And let me just flick through here to get to the point we're at, which I think is Roman numeral 3, number 6. We've looked at pruning meetings. We've looked at planning meetings. And now we're at presiding over them. Be prepared, pray and read the Bible, agree on the agenda, stick to the agenda and timetable, know the rules of order and keep to them, and read the meeting. And by that I mean we're looking out for positive and negative signs in the course of a meeting, a church meeting. So you're trying to interpret the tone of voices, facial expressions, bodily language. And eventually, as you get to know the characters too, you'll get to anticipate flashpoints. You'll know what presses different people's buttons and try to take the heat out of these situations, try and divert before these things happen. You'll also eventually see there are always personality clashes in consistories, elders, deacons, whatever you have, committee, there's always a personality clash. To try and avoid these or minimize the effect of these. Then seventhly, listen patiently. Try to listen to everyone who speaks so that you don't lose concentration, miss something important. Sometimes it can be tempting to switch off when certain people are speaking. You think, well, I don't agree with them, or they never say anything worthwhile, or they take so long to say it, or they say something about everything. And yet we may miss something good that they do eventually say if we just switch off. Try not to read documents when other people are speaking. If you feel that there's material in front of you that needs to be read, then just ask for a pause in the meeting. Say, can we just pause for 2 minutes while we read this? I don't want to miss what so-and-so is saying. And it is disrespectful. So listen patiently. Number 8, involve everyone. Some men are going to take more prominent roles than others, or women too if you're on a committee. But you should try to involve everyone. Try to make sure you never get through a meeting without everyone saying something at some point. Even if it means you're really drawing it out of them. People can be very hesitant to speak. They need to be encouraged. If they've got nothing worth saying, they shouldn't be at the meeting. But if they're at the meeting and they have a place at the table, then they have something to say. And the meeting is the worse for not hearing it. Now also be aware of the different categories or different characters of speakers at meetings. I put down a list there of the top 10 meeting personalities, which I think are quite amusing. The multitasker, I think you could probably substitute student there. The mobile meter, so he's always meeting in the carport, in the carpool, in the airport lounge, never really gets to meetings. The disruptor, the overbooked, attends far too many meetings, late to all of them. The interrupter, so is always breaking in and other people speaking. The socializer, really not there for business, but more for social reasons. But can be a helpful ally in a meeting in terms of producing a collaborative spirit. The maestro, so this is your consummate meeting professional. Everything is clear and organized, recaps, outlines, action items. Not all of these are bad. And maybe you need a bit of most of these in your meetings. The timekeeper, trying to motivate everyone to complete the meeting at the predicted close. That's me anyway. The snacker, crunching over the phone on the teleconference. The social networker, tweeting and Facebooking live from meetings. Note to self, bad form to tell your social network that meeting sucks, especially if you've befriended the meeting host. And here are some others I've come across and how I've tried to deal with them. So you've got dominators. So these people, you've got to credit their knowledge, but also stress the benefit of hearing other people's opinions. Ask for reactions. Don't let them speak every time they want to speak. Ramblers. So you get people, they just go on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Helpful stuff is in there. So your job as chairman is to summarize what they've said, and maybe after they've spoken, to remind people of the passing of time. Maybe if they've taken the meeting down a rabbit trail, to bring it back to the agenda. Then you've got the arguers. That's just, they're always saying what's bad with other people's proposals. So you want to ask them, well, what's your proposal? Let's hear something constructive from you. Then you've got the volcanoes. You can usually sense the rising heat in the meeting as they are seething silently at what somebody has said or not said. And usually the explosion comes by an email a few days later. So you want to try and take some of that steam out of that person. Maybe ask them to speak so that they're not just bottling it all up. The chatterers, always speaking in the background when someone else is speaking. So if they're doing that, maybe, well, most people say just try and look at the person for a bit. Pause, just stop the meeting and look at them. Or ask them, have you got something to share that we can all benefit from? And again, you're not doing this in an embarrassing way. You're not trying not to do it in an angry way. Just it'd be good to hear all these views so that we can all make the best decision. Involve everyone. Don't abuse your position. So if you're a chair, then you mustn't abuse that by advocating for a particular view. If you feel strongly enough about a subject, then you should vacate the chair for the duration of that business item, not just for you speaking during that business item. You should have somebody taking the chair who is of a more neutral mind about this particular item. Now, the pastor usually enjoys a degree of status in a church meeting. He's often more educated, more fluent in speech, more used to speaking in public. And he gains a lot of experience over the years at various church meetings. Elders also will often want to prove their loyalty to a pastor. And all this combines your experience, elders' desire to please and stay on the right side of the pastor. That really creates the huge potential of abuse of power and abuse of position. And if you take advantage of that, there will be some who detect it, and you will lose their respect. So you abuse your position by speaking too much, speaking when you shouldn't, when you're in the chair, by only introducing views from those you agree with or those who are more powerful or respected, and so on. Maybe using rules of order to prevent the processing of business that you don't agree with. That's usually clerks' tricks, secretaries. Diffuse tension. So you're going to have meetings that are going to be tense, going to be a bit heated. Sometimes prayer is a helpful reliever. So let's just pause, take some time out for prayer, or go and get a drink of juice or whatever. I've also found humor can be helpful in church meetings, just to, if used sparingly and carefully and wisely, to just diffuse tension a little bit. Or maybe say, well, let's change the subject. We're getting a wee bit heated here. We'll come back to this, but let's just get some business done and then come back when we're a wee bit calmer, cooler. So try and diffuse tension. Number 11, press towards decisions. So you want to allow time for discussion, but you also want to avoid wandering around in circles, round and round and round. So you're trying to detect, okay, nothing much new is being said here. The main points have been made. It's time now to move towards a decision on this, either by consensus or by vote. Number 12, end meetings at the agreed time, unless circumstances are exceptional. And what that does is it builds discipline for future meetings so that people know that they are going to have to speak faster or less in future. And it also prevents late night decisions, which often are regretted because they're done when people are tired and they just want to get home. Number 13, submit to decisions. So sometimes if a decision is made and you don't agree with it, then you just let it go. Other times, if the matter is substantial enough, if it's a real matter of conscience, then there may be provision for you to register a dissent in the minutes of the meeting. So you can't overturn it. This is going to happen, but you're simply clearing your own conscience in public so that, at least when it's revisited or people reread these minutes, they say, oh, well, so-and-so did not agree with that and didn't go along with it. But that should really be a last resort. You shouldn't be doing that every time you disagree with a decision. You have to reserve it for real matters of seriousness and of conscience. So you submit to decisions by trusting the Lord to work out his will through the combined wisdom of his people. It might just be, I'm ignorant on this. I lack the wisdom and insight that others have. One thing to avoid is letting it linger on you and take it as a me versus them situation. Try not personalize it, trying to say, well, it's an issue. No, it's not him, it's not them, it's an issue. Assign work. So before the meeting ends, make sure that ongoing work is assigned, that work has a name to it. And it's often useful at the end of a meeting for a clerk or secretary just to quickly go through all that's been agreed, maybe have a column or a quadrant, as we saw the last time, where it's recorded task, person, read it out so that people leave knowing that's recorded, they're going to be held accountable for it. If it can't be done immediately, then it should be done via the sending out of minutes very soon after the meeting. That brings us to our next point. Ensure minutes are written up quickly and agreed upon. So it's usually best for someone other than the chairman to be writing minutes. Try and make sure you've got someone who's very competent and efficient administratively. Try and get it done quickly and emailed out so that while it's still fresh in people's minds, they can agree or disagree. And again, this may include some measure of highlighting for specific people, tasks. Number 16, follow up with relationship issues. So if there have been any significant disagreements at the meeting, make sure that if it's with you that you contact the person the next day, make sure all's well between you, there's no hard feelings, we disagreed, we still don't agree, but we're still going to work together, there's no hard feelings. And if you see it between two brothers or whatever, in the court, district, whatever, that you encourage them also to deal with issues soon, rather than let things fester. Number 17, have non-business meetings. Sometimes it's good to meet without any business to discuss. So you can meet for prayer, you can meet to have a training seminar, you can meet for a brainstorming session. And the aim really is to build social interaction, spiritual fellowship, make people feel valued. We're not just getting together to function, but we're actually getting together to enjoy one another and the Lord himself. And lastly, practice accountability. So the secretary should be following up with tasks assigned so that before the next meeting, the work that's been assigned is done. And make sure again when the next meeting starts that the old items are all there to be checked off as dealt with and done. And we have to make sure we are accountable to one another in these areas. So, prune them, plan them, preside over them. I definitely fall on the anti-meeting side of life. As few as possible, as short as possible is my own kind of mantra. But I have to say that when meetings are well conducted, these can fulfill a spiritual need as well. They can be ministry opportunities. So in my last Scotch congregation, I think I had 10 elders and 12 deacons. And so we would have an elders meeting, and then the deacons meeting, it was really everyone together. So we'd 23, 24 people sometimes. And we had controversial issues to deal with. There's nothing more controversial than putting up a new building, a new church. And yet, these meetings were, I would say 95% of the time, much more like spiritual fellowships than board meetings. Spiritual bonds were deepened, friendships were grown, people appreciated each other, and seeing the different gifts and insights God had blessed various people with, and from manual all the way to more intellectual gifts. And I often came home really on a high from these meetings, that God had been in our midst and made our meeting good. And really, what can be better than that, to have God in the midst of us while meeting? So you probably detect a negativity at times in that lecture, but yeah, there can be good times too. So let's have a time of questions, comment. I'm sure some of you have been in church meetings. Anything you've learned, Ken?
How do you deal with the situation where the room just becomes so toxic that you really can't accomplish anything? It's just divided, the chairman is really unsure as to how to handle the situation. Can you just give some advice as to how to start working your way out of some of these really messy?
Yeah. I think what you probably want to do is stop, before it gets any worse. And just look, let's let everyone acknowledge here, this is not going well. However, whatever side we fall on here, this is not good. And I would just end the meeting and take some days or even a week before you come back together again. But in the meantime, to be doing some good pastoral work, bringing people together out of the public meeting, as it were. Sometimes it's very hard for men to climb down in front of others, but maybe you can bring two warring people together out of the sight and sound of everyone else and say, look, we've got to do this better the next time. Let's get some things that we just will not do and say, and just view it as a real opportunity to learn reconciliation as well. And then I think if this is ongoing, though, and it can be in churches, there can be ongoing, real, every meeting, you really have to get outside help. You need to get objective people to come in, a neighbouring church, pastor, elders, to oversee and to try and bring about a peace, if possible. And I think in our more Presbyterian churches, that would be very easy to do. Not so easy for independent churches, but I think when even independent churches, when it's by invitation, I think most independent churches would accept that. It's not a wider body saying, hey, we've got rights here, but the local church saying, we need help here. Any thoughts yourself, Ken? Have you seen it, and have you? Yeah. So what was the solution? Or wasn't there one?
There wasn't one. It just really disintegrated, and pastor eventually left, and it was just a real mess. I had asked
Yeah, there has to be a willingness to make it work, obviously. There's got to, both parties, or however many there are, must be aiming at, hey, let's all work together. But oftentimes, people are out to divide and destroy. And in that case, then, you have to act more judicially. Joel?
Have you heard of anybody that says the minister should not be the chairman just because of the potential abuse of power? In a consistory
Yeah.
council?
I haven't heard of anyone saying you should or shouldn't. I'm not chairman of our consistory this year. That was my decision because I felt that, number one, I had too much on my plate. Number two, I actually felt that I couldn't contribute so much to the meeting. I was kind of sitting there, and as a chairman, you're really not able to give your own opinion. And I actually have much preferred it to be this way. It's the first time in all of my pastoring that I've not been the chairman of the elders or consistory, whatever. And it's been really good, I think. And I think I've seen as well that it's actually brought more people out in that, one of their own, it's actually Hank Klein, is in the chair. And so I think I've seen elders more willing to speak when the minister is like just one of them, and the real parity is recognized in that very visible way. I don't want to go back. I like it this way. Paul?
How do you deal with people who may say something and people who follow them because they don't want to upset them?
Yeah, I think there needs to be ongoing training. I think that's one of the things that doesn't happen in many churches. Like you just get into office and you do what you think you should do, but there's not really any training. And we've started that this year with our elders, and then we're moving on to our deacons. And from what I can gather, all the elders feel, whoa, we've really been operating in total ignorance here of how to act at meetings and lead in meetings. And this is one of the things we've talked about, that you never vote for something because of who is proposing it or against it for a similar reason. And the vital importance of separating principle from person and issues from people. So I think that should be built. It's always hard when something like that arises, because once you try and deal with that in the heat of the moment, people's pride gets involved. And so I think if instead you can have a rolling program of ongoing training, retraining, reminding, then you've got a better chance of actually dealing with that in the long run. So what I would want to do, Paul, is not probably deal with that in the here and now, but set up some kind of program that would prevent it in the future. You can go, Felipe, if you want. We'll just have a few more questions and then break. Yes, Young Jay.
How can you make sure pastor has equal parity with other elders when people think that pastors are really highly regarded because they have authority in the word of God?
Yep. It's a good question, Young Jay, and it's very, very difficult in many circles. It's not so difficult, I've seen in Baptist circles. I think there's a much greater, it's never quite, but it's much greater parity. I think you have to distinguish between parity in governing and parity in preaching. So you as elders, we have equality in terms of our governing authority. But usually, even in Baptist circles, you've got one who is selected or two who are to be ministers of the word. They are recognized as having giftings and abilities above and beyond the governing. So, and they are worthy of double honor for that task. So I think it's important to separate the two. Otherwise, it doesn't feel right to people. But he's a minister of the word. But I think the key is the way the minister acts when it comes to governing. If he is there as the dominant tyrant, always speaking, then that's going to impact the elders and therefore the people as well. So I think it begins with the minister, not devaluing his minister of the word role, but taking every opportunity to demonstrate his belief in equality and parity in a governing setting. Ministers find that really hard. If you, I think if you could see inside the psychology of most ministers, whatever they say, a lot would have the inner thought, I am not equal. And they don't act it either, therefore. So I think the challenge is really for ourselves. And if we can win that battle, I think over time it can become more common in our people. But also to teach our people to preach and really emphasize to them. And it's going to be new to a lot of people, especially in Presbyterian Reformed circles, the whole idea of parity in governing. It's just got to be repeated all the time. If you have assemblies and synods as well, where ministers and elders gather together much more publicly, again, it's really incumbent on ministers to let elders speak and encourage equality of communication, and not, again, for ministers to dominate just because they know the ropes better. Let's have a break, okay, and then we'll start the next one. Let's take 5 minutes, okay? image for handling criticism. The best I could come up with is a matador, because your people are trying to gore you, and the skill is to try and get out of the way. Hopefully, though, the end result is not big spears in the back of the bull. Sometimes you might wish it was so, but so it's not a perfect image. But as Joel Beakey says, there's scarcely a thing in your ministries that will be more important than this, handling criticism. So we want to look today at preparing for criticism, distinguishing criticism, responding to criticism, recovering from criticism. So first of all, preparing for criticism. How can I prepare for this? Now, there's only one way for a matador to avoid confrontations with bulls, and that's never to get in the ring. And there's only one way to avoid criticism in the church, and that's never to do anything, never to get involved in the church. And that's not just true of the church, it's true of all walks of life. Sport, politics, entertainment, business. You will never achieve anything in any walk of life if you're unwilling to receive criticism, or if you are easily defeated by it. John Wesley once questioned in his journal if he was truly right with God, since he had received no criticism for that entire day. So, if criticism is inevitable, can we prepare for it? Yes, we can. Just as no matador steps into the ring without thorough preparation, so the Christian leader should also prepare spiritually and physically for the inevitable charge. So we begin with spiritual preparation. First of all, walk humbly with God. Pride comes before a fall. If we are overconfident or if we're self-confident, we're going to stumble. We're going to make some big mistakes and therefore receive just criticism. So seek a deep sense of your own spiritual vulnerability. Walk humbly with God. Secondly, pray to be kept from sin and foolishness. Now, you'll be criticized even if you never sin. So Jesus was. Even if you do nothing foolish, to Jesus too. However, you'll be criticized even more if you do sin and if you do stupid things. So don't give extra ammunition. Pray to be kept from sin and foolishness. Thirdly, if you make a mistake, admit it as soon as possible. So you make a mistake, don't wait for the critic to find out or launch the attack. Take a preemptive measure. Go and admit it. Go and apologize for it. Take the wind out of the sails of criticism. Number 4, practice self-control with your tongue. Now, ideally, you're going to be working at a deeper level, heart level, in quelling and quenching anger. Anger that leads to bad-tempered retaliation. However, in the meantime, practice simply saying little or nothing in response to criticism. You might want to think of a stock phrase that you will use when you're criticized to stop you having to think about what to say and thinking the wrong things and saying the wrong things. So maybe something like this. Well, thank you for taking the time to speak to me about that. Please give me some time to prayerfully think about what you've said and let me get back to you on it. So it's really practicing self-control with your tongue. You kind of are, many of us, our instinct is to strike back. This just helps us develop that vital self-control. Then there is physical preparation. The matador's preparation. Are you wondering what that noise is? I was wondering what is going on in this class. It's a camera, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, somebody playing an instrument here in the background. That's what I was thinking. It's just always moving, isn't it?
It moves when every move you make, it moves to
That's,
follow you.
aye.
It follows the nexus thing.
I mean, I'm hardly moving at all.
Just a little bit.
Wow. Okay. So the matador's preparation involves the mental, the emotional, and even the spiritual at some levels. But he must also prepare physically. This is the matador. If he's to be sharp and if he's to be agile in his art. Matadors are some of the fittest sports people, apparently, in the world. But the pastor also has to prepare physically for verbal attacks. Now, I'm sure all of you know this. When you're lacking in sleep, lacking in exercise, you're physically run down, that has a knock-on effect on our emotions and our thinking patterns. If we're fresh, if we're fit, it's so much easier to react the right way to those who are charging at us with criticism. So spiritual preparation, physical preparation. I often noticed that Mondays after preaching and all the things that go on Sunday, if I was criticized on a Monday, it was like the end of the world for me. And usually, well, sometimes anyway, I did retaliate. And I got into the habit of saying, look, I'm really willing to listen to this, but can we do it tomorrow? Because just Monday is not a good day for me. Because I wasn't physically run down, mentally drained. Prepare for criticism. Number 2, distinguish the criticisms. So there are different kinds of criticism. Just as the matador has to distinguish between different bulls, so must the pastor. So the matador studies bulls before he goes in the ring with them. He studies them close up, and he studies them from a distance. And he sees how they interact with other bulls and other matadors and other people. He's analyzing their character. He is anticipating how and when they will attack. Some bulls are very aggressive, determined to kill. Others view it as more of a game. Others treat the matador with the utmost respect. So the matador's strategy is going to be determined by the nature of the bulls and the nature of their attacks. So the pastor has to carefully distinguish between different kinds of critics and different kinds of criticism. So, first of all, there's invited criticism. So this might be scheduled or regular evaluation and review by one or more people in one or more area of ministry. So, for example, in our own church, we have a quarterly preaching review where the elders gather. The 2 or 3 people who have been preaching most regularly are not part of that. They discuss in the absence of the ministers, and then the ministers are invited in, and encouragement and correction is given. But there may be other areas for review as well. How are people responding to the minister socially and in visitation and things like that? So this is something that you should set up. You should set up in your church. If it's not there already, you should set up invited criticism by appropriate parties. And that can often stay and defer or prevent uninvited criticism. Uninvited criticism could be regular by one person, and there will always be one person who will be a regular critic, at least one. Or it could be just one-off, people whose opinion you did not ask for. So you're not saying to these people, hey, come and speak into my life, but they decide to do it anyway. It's uninvited criticism. Thirdly, there's justified criticism. Of course, there's overlap with some of these categories. So here is where the criticism is accurate. It's a fair reflection of the truth. And similarly, unjustified criticism is inaccurate, it's false, it's untrue, it's imbalanced. Then there's constructive criticism, which is aimed at my good. It's to help me become better at what I do. Again, the contrast is destructive criticism, which is intended to discourage, to damage, to dishearten, to demotivate, to diminish. There's sensitive criticism, where it's expressed with love, with wisdom, with balance. And there's insensitive criticism, which is insensitive, careless in tone and content and regarding even the situation in which it's done. There's backstabbing criticism, which is an undermining of you behind your back, in your absence, as it were. Now, if you view all criticism as a bad thing, then you're not going to get the benefit of the kind of criticism that is invited, justified, constructive, and sensitive. But if you don't distinguish criticism, good from bad and so on, then you're going to be crushed by giving equal weight to all of these kinds of criticism. So you want to go through, and you can have invited criticism that's unjustified. You can have invited criticism that's justified, but it's insensitive in its expression and so on. So we need to carefully distinguish the criticisms, because that will help us, thirdly, to respond to the criticism. So you've prepared for it, you've distinguished the nature of the critic and their criticism, but now you have to respond. Are you going to be gored by it? Are you going to be injured by it? Or with a flourish of your cape, will you let the bull pass by and learn good lessons from it? Okay, the image is falling apart here. I don't want you going around saying, oh, he thinks his elders are like bulls or whatever. But Joel's right. How you deal with this is going to determine the whole course of your leadership and your ministry. So 4 steps to avoid. First one is reject. So without a moment's thought, you simply dismiss the criticism, minimize it, move on. Just brushes off you. You're having nothing to do with it. Then some people retaliate. Again, often without even a pause. He attacks me, I'm attacking him. He criticizes me, I'm criticizing him. Thirdly, resent. So you might very Christianly accept what was said or appear to, but inwardly you are seething and bitterly brooding on what has been said. 4th wrong way is resign. You just give in, give up, run away, or threaten to. So, 4-step plan to follow. Number 1, receive the criticism. So whether it comes in verbal or written form, the first thing to do is pray for grace, to listen to what's being said. It's not nice. No one likes to be criticized. We all like to be perfect. It takes grace to admit we're not in practice. So if the person's in front of you, it's face to face, and they're criticizing you, then pray inwardly for the person. But they'll say this the best way possible, and you'll respond in the best way possible. Look them in the eye. Try to project calm. Try to avoid hostile body language. Either defensive postures, or you start inwardly flexing. Avoid facial expressions that communicate anger. Usually some good deep breathing is helpful. And ask for time to think and pray about what's being said. Now, you might want to clarify what's being said if the person's just like pouring it out and there's a ton of stuff there in front of you. I think it's good to, can I just get clear? I really want to understand this. Is this what you're talking about? And just sort of restate it in your own words and get agreement. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. so that you both understand the problem. And give a rough idea of when you plan to respond. Don't just say, well, I'll think and pray about it, and the person says, well, will I ever hear? You might think, a week is a fair time. They're thinking 24 hours. So you say, I'd like to take 3 or 4 days or 24 hours or just depending on the seriousness or insignificance of the thing. And thank the person. Thank him for coming to you in person. Pray together. I think it's always helpful if you can do that. And in the prayer, set the complaint in the context of this wider relationship. Thank you for Joe here and all that we've managed to do together in the Lord's service and all the gifts you've given him. And just you're taking opportunity to try and communicate that there's no resentment, there's no anger, even if there is. But just, I love, and saying the words helps your own spirit. You're praying it for yourself. So receive the criticism. Number 2, reflect on it. So you want to try and ask some of the questions like, is it true? Is it even slightly true? It doesn't have to be wholly and completely true. Is it in any way true? Is there a grain of truth in this? And number 2, is it proportionate? Is this making a mountain out of a molehill? Is it in the context of previous appreciation for the pastor? So, if you've got somebody who's been a great encourager and somebody who's appreciated you over the years, you're going to give him, her a lot more time and thought and consideration of criticism than somebody who's just always at you. It's just a habit, or somebody is just a kind of negative, critical person. Does the criticism extend beyond one sermon? Is it just one thing they're targeted on, or is it wider? Is it balanced in expression, or was that quite hostile? Was it exaggerated? So you're asking that all under this question, is it proportionate? Is it appropriate? So you're asking, thirdly, who is making the criticism? So again, as I've said, if it's a godly, consistent Christian, then you'll pay much more attention to it. If this person has an imbalanced theology or some particular theological hobby horse, again, that might be taken into account when you're measuring the validity of the criticism. Is there something behind the criticism, you might want to ask? Can you find out, is there trouble at work? Is there stress in the home? Oftentimes you'll find, especially if you're kind of puzzled by the criticism, you feel it's not characteristic or incredibly imbalanced, you maybe make a bit of inquiry and find out how things are. Has he been ill and things like that? How many times have you heard this criticism is another question. So if it's coming from a number of independent sources, so we're not talking about the cabal in the back pew that are always talking about this and against you, but is this coming from a number of kind of disconnected people you wouldn't have expected? Again, you would give it much greater attention. Sometimes it might be worth getting some advice. So maybe a second opinion from a trusted elder, fellow pastor, or a friend, someone who's more objective than you. You say, well, here's what has been said. Here's my view of it. You know me. You know this situation. You know that person. Can you give me a feel for this as I'm trying to reflect on it? And if the person is in agreement with your critic, then ask him, well, can you hold me to account as I try to respond to this person? Here's where I'd like to go. I'll report to you on this down the road. And again, it just helps you moderate your response. That takes us to step 3, respond to the criticism. So you're trying to build a long-term relationship with people. So think beyond winning a short-term easy victory. But then you lose a long-term opportunity to do a person's spiritual good. So you might find that what this person said is utterly ridiculous. It's totally exaggerated. It's completely insensitive. It's not representative. It's just a bunch of baloney. And it would be so easy for you to show that and demonstrate that. But in doing so, there may be a humiliation. There may be a short-term victory and a long-term loss. So you end up alienating the person. So even if you can find just the littlest bit of truth, then give the person that and try to build for the long term. I think it's always possible, better to meet in person rather than by email or telephone. Pray together when you come together to talk about this. And then just try to calmly explain, okay, now you said this, this and this, now see this here, you're absolutely right. In this area, I agree with you. I got that wrong. I did something I shouldn't have done there. I'm thankful to you for coming to me about this because I want to be a better servant and leader. I want to build a relationship with you. And if it's involving other people, then again you have to explain, and this is how I plan to apologize to others. This is how I plan to put things right with others. Hopefully we're not at this level of doing something so bad it merits your resignation. But you want to ask the person, is my response satisfactory to you? Is this what you are hoping to achieve? Do you feel that my words to you and my actions maybe to others is an appropriate response to this criticism? So you're trying to get closure there. You're trying to bring the person and say, well, that's it, that's done, it's in the past. And close with prayer, asking God to bless your relationship, not let the devil in, grow in mutual love and respect. It's always easy to pick faults in someone's criticisms. And it may be part of your ministry is, as well as accepting the grain of truth or the mountain of truth, that you might have, or you might consider it wise to minister to the person in terms of, now, while this was good that you did this, here's something that I think you should try and avoid in the future, or here's a better way of doing this. I want to hear from you in the future. Here's what I think I would respond better to. And so you're trying to help that person, again, not just in your relationship with them, but in terms of how they deal with this in their wider relationships too. So you're trying to turn this into a ministry opportunity, a sanctifying opportunity for the person. But you've got to judge that, because you don't want it just to be, a tit for tat. I give this, I take that. Okay, I'll give you that, but here's that. And it may be better to just take the small or big piece of criticism and then down the line at a later date talk to the person about areas they maybe could improve in terms of critiquing. Then the fourth step, repent of your error or sin. So it's not enough just to say. There has to be action. When a matador is injured, he reviews film of the incident, learns from his mistake, and puts things right for the future. So the Christian leader should respond, not just by accepting, okay, I said I did something wrong, but by putting things right for the future. Certainly avoiding a repetition. Then lastly here, recovering from criticism. It's important to move on, regardless of the merits of the criticism, however well you deal with it at the time, it's important to move on. I put some tips there from a guy called Tim Ferriss, a famous author of the 4-Hour Workweek. And he has this on dealing with haters. They're not drawn from the Bible, but I think they contain a lot of common sense. You can have a read of that. But I would add to these, do nothing to further inflame the situation. Keep praying for the person and for love to them. Don't take sneaky swipes at them from the pulpit or in public prayer. If somebody's critiqued you, they're really looking out for that. Try to find an early reason to do them good or visit them and their families, so that you're showing there's no ill will here, there's no bad feeling. Don't become a people pleaser, someone whose life and ministry is dictated by the demands of others. And again, just set up the accountability structures that will maybe help to preempt the criticism and weigh it better when it does come. So every matador carries wounds and scars from too close encounters with hostile bulls, and some of them have been deserved. Others result from a lack of skill or ability to let the bull sweep past in its irrational rage. So I hope basically this guidance will help you avoid inflaming the bulls, dodge the angry and irrational ones, but also learn from your own missteps that have left you justly wounded and scarred. Questions, thoughts, experiences? Yes, John.
Just a thought, that to remember when this comes our way and time to come to go, that all things come under the hand of God. And remember that text to humble yourself therefore, not under the puny hand of the critical person, but under the mighty hand of God. And that you may go through you.
Yep, good word, John. Good word. No one finds this easy, do they? John.
Another question. You spoke about resentment. Now, before of those steps to avoid, I think that one's probably the most pervasive and most subtle. How do you deal with yourself?
Yeah, I can't say I've ever been very good at this in the past. Well, I find it easier today, probably because when you're in the maelstrom initially, you wonder, am I going to survive this? Is my ministry going to survive? Is this going to divide our congregation? And then, once you've ridden a few of these, you become a wee bit more sanguine about it. You don't treat it as nothing, but you realize, we'll get through this, and I don't need to be sleepless night after night. And I think also as you do get, I don't think I'll say that. I'll tell you what I was going to say. I was going to say, I think as you probably grow in experience, people are less likely to criticize you. You probably get more as a younger minister than an older, but then I thought, no, that's just tempting fate. So I'll just avoid saying that. Practice preaching is really good practice for this.
That's why we like it so
That's what that was all about, you'll say one day. Biting my tongue, trying to look happy and accepting. I hate Dr. Murray. I'll be back next season, by the way. John.
You spoke through the lecture about you go back to the person and talk to them again. You kind of made it sound like a bit of a process. How often have you gone back to the person later as opposed to just dealing with it all in one shot and saying thank you, praying, being done with it? Or am I misreading you? Is it always done in one shot?
I mean, I used to deal with more on the spot, but for myself, John, I realised it's just not a good way of doing it. There's just something about me that, the red mist comes up, and I'm not able to interact with the criticism calmly. But I have learned to ask for a delay calmly that doesn't look hostile or angry. But for myself, I'm just not very good at that initial response. So it's partly knowing yourself. If you're kind of that calm, non-confrontational type of person that, you can roll with it at the time, then sure, yeah. Paul.
You said to ask them, is your response, is my response satisfactory? What if they say no?
Right? Yeah, well, yes. Well, what more can I do? What are you looking for here?
If they say you to repent,
well, all you can do is the Lord knows. Or you ask them, what would repentance look like to you? I'm saying sorry. I do feel I am sorry. Is there something else I can do? Or you could just say, well, obviously you have to watch me over a period of time to see that I'm changing my ways, and maybe we can get back together again. The reason I say it's important to ask that is otherwise it's lingering. You just haven't tied it up. You haven't closed the circle. And you've left it for the person to open it up again. Whereas if you've got a commitment from somebody, a verbal agreement, that's done. We're finished. I'm happy. Then obviously, if it's raised again, you can appeal to that. And if the person's not happy, then that's when you would bring in somebody else with their agreement to assess this and see if, would you be willing to accept so-and-so's view, and we could both go to him, and hopefully it wouldn't get to that. David, and then Dennis.
Just wondering, comments on recent events. The danger of responding by email. I've seen issues at Westminster Seminary. Emails C.J. Mahaney sent to people, Mark Driscoll, all sorts of things like that. Is it just always best to do it face to face?
Yeah.
There do seem to be people out there to get you.
I know, there are, David. Yeah. You hate to think that of people as well, but you just can never tell. Even the most loving, loyal people can turn against you down the road. And
A huge email trail.
yeah. Craig. Oh, sorry, Dennis first, then Craig.
I was more thinking about giving criticism,
Hmm.
just thinking that that's something that leaders are called to.
Hmm.
And I was thinking about what Rosaria said in the talk when she said that the harshness of what you say to a person has to match the depth of your relationship with that person.
Okay. Okay.
But aren't there exceptions sometimes? I'm just thinking that if I see some simple patterns in one of the leaders, like elders, and I might not be really close to them to say that, but I ought to, right? So there are some cases when I have to speak harshly,
Yep.
even though my relationship is not as deep. I mean, I just want you to speak to that, I guess. What do you think about that statement?
Yeah, and sometimes you have a duty, and the circumstances are not ideal. Either you're not long there, you don't know the person very well, and I think you'd want to preface anything you say with that. I wish I knew better. I wish we had a longer-term relationship, but there's something here that I can't really close my eyes to. Maybe you can help me understand it, and just reveal your awkwardness. And the difficulty of doing it, I think, can often gain you a hearing.
What about the statements? I mean, some people say that your best friends are those who can critique you.
Yeah, yeah.
Without, being afraid of you just hammering them. Is
Yeah.
that true?
I think there are different kinds of friendships. You can have friendships where it's really all 99% affirmative and positive and together and optimistic, and we need that. I think the idea that every friendship has to have this continual sort of accountability is disruptive to friendship. Part of it is unconditional friendship. But then there are other friendships with people that we might build for that very purpose. It's not to say that your best friends you would never talk to in that way, but for myself, there are friendships that unless it's like really, really, really bad, I'm not going to go there. It's just I want us to just enjoy one another And then there are others where there's an understanding that both of us are to help one another and call one another to account. And that's sort of to be expected. And so every time you meet, you're going to get a slice taken off you or whatever. And that's the way I work anyway. I just hate the idea of friendships that are always in one another's faces. Are we done? We have an early day today? Yeah? Okay. Well, Dennis, why don't you close in prayer then?
Father God, we come into your presence in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and we thank you for this blessing we've had. The Lord, help us to be attentive listeners and to be receptive to criticism, and to remember that the greatest critique that we could have ever received was received by our Lord and Savior on the cross. Help us to find comfort in that, and help us to move along and be prepared for criticism and rely on you more and go through criticism seeking your glory. It's in Christ's name that we pray.
Amen. No, I've seen them on television. I've been to what do they call it? A bull ring.